Welcome to the official Lawyer Minds podcast. Lawyer Minds is an ever-growing ecosystem for all the resources modern lawyers need. As the official Lawyer Minds podcast, we'll discuss everything from the latest happenings on the website to industry news. Get ready. Here we go. It's time to dive into the minds of successful lawyers. Here are your hosts, Tad Thomas and Mike Campbell.
Tad, how goes it, brother?
It's been interesting last couple of weeks around the office. So we had to replace a paralegal, actually.
Oh, wow. That's never fun.
No, and it parlays into our discussion with Cheryl today.
Yeah, so part of the discussion, and you've worked with Cheryl for a long time, is about dealing with personality types in the office. You've got a lot of staff. How do you manage all the personality types? Or why, let's start, why is it important to figure out the personality types? Then maybe that'll help with the second question.
Well, at one point in time, I probably would have told you it doesn't matter what the personality type is. I expect them to just do their jobs. And then, as time went on, I kind of decided, well, there's things that I can do to help people do their jobs, whether it's motivation or leadership or, whatever. And understanding the personality types for each one of the people that work with me helps me get 100% and give 100% and make sure that, the team is working at the highest level possible. So, again, at one point in time, I would have told you it's not important. Now I really think it is. And, that's one of the things I've worked with Cheryl with over the years is, learning personality types and what I need to do based on my personality type to make sure that we're functioning well together.
Yeah, so it's fascinating because one of the things that I really wanted early on or desire was like a mentor that would work with me really closely on all my cases, right? And be very patient with me and understanding and work through each of the cases and not give me too much stuff. And so whenever I have taken that approach with the people who work with me and on my team, and then they leave to go do something else, I'm like, what the heck? That is exactly what that would have been my dream to have that. Well, as it turns out, everybody's motivated differently. Just because I have those, motivations and desires doesn't mean that that's going to motivate my staff to want to come to work every day.
Yeah. Well, and you got to be careful. It's one of the tests I took a long time ago was, the change indicator. And, what I learned about myself is I don't have a problem with change. I'll change if I think the need is there. I'm not too, stuck in my ways, but, you have people on your team that are on the opposite ends, and you have people, especially attorneys, who do not like change, period.
Yeah.
And, so you got to learn how to work with those people on your team and bring them along. Then you have other people on the team that, think there's something wrong with everything and you need to change everything in your process. So you got to learn how to manage those personalities as well.
Yeah. And that's the thing is you hear, well, she's oil, I'm water, he's oil, I'm water, we just don't mix. And, if you're working as part of a team, which I've always struggled with, you've got to figure out how to get the, right ingredients, and it's all about communication. And I think Cheryl does a nice job of, providing, hey, here are the tools to figure out where you are on this sort of communication spectrum. And this is the tools you'll need to be able, here are the tools you'll need to be able to communicate with other people in your team.
Yeah, I remember the first time I went from being, really not supervising many people at all. I was a solo practitioner for the first 8 years of my practice. And I went from there to running essentially half of the Attorney General's office in Kentucky, and had 4 divisions under me with over 100 people, 50 plus lawyers and investigators, paralegals, and things like that. And, they were state government employees that had job descriptions and had their jobs. And I was used to doing whatever needed to be done. And,
Right.
So when I went to supervise people that were used to having their pigeonhole jobs and that's all they did, I struggled. And, there for a while, I was not a very good manager because I expected them to do things that were outside of their job description. So, it took me a while to learn that. And so I spent 3 years there, and it was a good experience for me to get to, where we are now, and, understanding that, people have different views of what their job is, and you have to deal with that.
Yeah, when I'm one of those people, I just don't want to be in a box, right? So when I took this DISC assessment that I think Cheryl will talk about, I'm like, in my mind, I'm kind of thinking maybe I should like not answer correctly just because I don't want to be put in this box. But I did. I was honest through the whole thing because I thought, well, we'll see.
That says something about your personality in of itself. You didn't want to answer truthfully, Mike.
I didn't want to be in a box. I hate to be categorized, right? And so, so I did. I answered truthfully, but I went through and I just couldn't stop laughing because I was reading all the, explanations, or this is what your personality type likes, sees. And I just was laughing because I was like, man, this is spot on. And my mind is resistant to the idea that I can't communicate with someone on my own terms. And my mind is also resistant to the idea that I am, moved by force. It's kind of like when you talk with a jury, right? And every juror can tell you, yeah, I'm fair, right? I'm not biased. I can be fair. And, it's I'm the same way. I'm so guilty of that. It's like, I can be fair. I can assess this whole situation fairly. And it's like, when you look at this assessment, you realize I'm really partial to certain, personality types. That's how I view the world. And everything is kind of filtering through those confirmations. And it's like, what's good for the jury and using in jury selection isn't good for me. And yet when I went through it, I thought, oh, wow, this is spot on.
One of the reasons why I wanted to have Cheryl on is, because of the remote work, that we've been doing since COVID hit. And, my firm technologically was pretty well equipped to switch to working remotely. But, you have personnel issues that come with that. And when, someone's desk is now their dining room table, how do you motivate? How do you supervise? How do you make sure that stuff's getting done? And, I really wanted to talk to Cheryl today about solutions for that issue, because I firmly believe, this isn't the end of it, even though things are opening back up and we're somewhat open in our office. I think, the other shoe is going to drop, maybe this fall, and we're all going to have to go back to remote again. So I want to talk to her because we certainly have had issues in our firm with remote work and productivity. So I want to talk to her about, how do we deal with that going forward?
And I admit I'm guilty of not keeping up and holding, other team members to account to make sure that they're doing stuff, because I just feel constantly like I have to make sure I'm getting my own stuff done. And it's a lot easier when you're not in the office to not check in and make sure that people are doing okay. You just have those normal conversations with people, either around the water cooler or walking by their desk. And then 2, making sure that they're actually getting work done in a productive manner. I've been completely guilty of falling short of that. So I'm hoping Cheryl can selfishly give me some ideas for how to move forward.
Well, she's great. I've been working with her for a number of years. So let's go ahead and hear from Cheryl Pope with Carlton Human Capital. Cheryl Pope, thanks for joining us. How are you today?
Good. Thanks for having me.
So you and I have worked together for several years. You've coached me and tried to help me actually be able to run a law firm. And it's taken a lot of work on your part. So I appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, and you're very nice when you say that, but you've really done all the heavy lifting. So
I don't know about that. You got to point me in the right direction at least. So Cheryl, tell us a little bit about, your practice and your job with Carlton Human Capital and how you got started.
Sure. So, out of college, I did the corporate thing like most people. I spent 20 plus years working in corporations like American Airlines, and then Brinker, which is the parent company for restaurants that most of y'all have probably eaten at, like Chili's and Maggiano's. And then I went to work for a private equity firm. all of which was involved somehow with people. How do you get people on the same page, rowing in the same direction towards the same goal? And just in all of the industries across all, everything, the challenges are the same. People are people, the good, the bad, and the ugly, to quote Clint Eastwood. And so when I went out on my own about 7 years ago, I was supporting a lot of corporate clients, and then being married to a trial lawyer whom I love dearly, I would get deposed at dinner every night. And I kind of had this epiphany where I was like, wow, I could actually maybe help some attorneys along the way here, because, most attorneys, and I know it's changing a little bit now with, some of the new things they're teaching in law schools, a lot of them, but, go to law school, learn how to practice law. Not a lot about how to, run a business, and not a lot about how to interact effectively with other people. And while I guess treating and talking to your paralegal the same way that you may treat or talk to opposing counsel is certainly an option, it's probably not a great long-term option for success and employee engagement and productivity and all that stuff, because at the end of the day, while it may feel like people are running a not-for-profit firm, everybody wants to make money, and that everybody encompasses the people that work in law firms as well. So I started expanding it to working with different law firms.
So wait, so if Tad sends bonuses to all his opposing counsel, he's not supposed to send them to his employees? Is that the implication?
That's a whole different conversation.
Yeah, just joke. Sorry about that.
I know over the years, we always talk about how lawyers make terrible business people to a large degree. And, you've worked with people that I'm sure you think are very good leaders and very good managers, and ones who are not. And whether it's in the legal field or in another professional setting, what do you see are quality aspects of a leader that you really find that are effective? And how do you coach to bring that out in leaders and managers who are less effective?
Wow, that's a 3-week training class in and of itself, probably the answer to that. But I'd say some of the key qualities are, first and foremost, humility and being comfortable not having all of the answers, but communication and feedback. And that's 2 ways. Being willing to have conversations with people, to set clear expectations, to tell them when they're doing things right, why, and to talk to them when they're not doing things right and why. But most importantly, to be open to feedback from the people around you, because you don't have to have all of the answers as an attorney. And it's hard, because whether you're in a corporation or whether you're leading a small firm or a big firm, people look up to you as the boss and think you should have all of the answers. Probably the hardest words for a leader, regardless of where they work, to say are, I don't know. And so having that humility to be able to utter those words, and then to be comfortable in your own skin, to be able to have the conversation with somebody about, what's important to them about knowing that, or, why don't you know it, or what's your plan to get to it. All of those different things, I think, make a really good leader. And I think one of the biggest things that we're starting to see a lot about right now is just this notion of empathy. It's always been important for leaders to have, but now politicians are running campaigns based on the empathy platform. TV shows that are taking over by storm have empathy built into it. And it's not something that we've really talked about a lot, but I think especially the law firm clients that I have, those that practice empathy and are aware of their own, where they are personally in their own headspace, are the ones who are doing the best, especially during COVID right now.
So you let off with humility. So as far as being a quality of a good leader, so you've ruled out trial lawyers with that,
right?
And teenagers, just based on my own teenage son. So let's move on, since humility is not going to apply to most of the people.
Okay. Actually, let me ask this. Let's say you have humility as a trial attorney. Yep. Let's say that you are willing to say, I don't know, because I I actually do say that regularly because I really don't know. But what about someone like me who's like, okay, but I just don't want to deal with having to hold people accountable, right? It's like I'm averse to conflict, or I don't want to like say, why didn't you get this done?
So that was you actually just answered the question that I was in my mind thinking that Tad might ask, which is, well, what do you see as the biggest kind of opportunity, or what gets in the way for trial lawyers a lot? And ironically, most of the trial lawyer clients that I have are terrified of conflict. And I don't know that they're terrified of it as much as it just expends a lot of energy. And you guys throw your heart and soul into your cases and your clients' issues, and you become them on some levels when you're fighting, for their rights and for justice on their behalf. But when you get back to the office, the last thing you want to do is hear about how Bob ate Sally's tuna fish sandwich out of the refrigerator, right? And so I think what happens is so many people are just trying to survive, and they're not being intentional about what do they want their firm to look like? What do they want employees to look like? Culture is a very interesting thing because every organization on the planet has a culture, and some of them are good and some of them aren't good. But more often than not, the ones who have really good cultures have been intentional about it. And what I mean by that is to eliminate some of the drama, to avoid having to have some of that conflict and those tough conversations. It means starting before you even put out the first help wanted sign and say, hey, here's actually what I want this firm to be like. And then try and hire people to that. Like, know what your ideal employee looks like and try and hire towards that. And then I've seen this so many times. People say, oh my gosh, I've got to get a new paralegal. My old paralegal quit. Friday's their last day. I got to have somebody in here by Monday. I think if you take a step back and ask a question of, are we potentially doing ourselves more harm by just getting a body in there than waiting a couple weeks and get the right person in there, will help eliminate some of those things. So that's, I think, and this is going to be a bit of a long answer, so bear with me. So number one, know what you're trying to hire for. Number two, when you do make that hire, don't just ask whoever is at the reception desk to just help Mary figure out like where things are, show her where the bathroom is, etc. You need to invest the time and effort into that person. I hear a lot of times, well, they're a paralegal, they should know how to do this. That's a lot different. I mean, if you go to restaurants, you've been to 1,000 restaurants. Every restaurant does steps of service just a little bit different. Yeah, somebody's taking your order, getting your food, filling your water glasses, but the steps and the process that they use to do it is a little bit different. You need to get to know them up front. So if you invest a little bit of that energy and are clear about that stuff up front, you'll start to build that trust. So when you have something that goes a little wonky, it won't be such a dramatic moment for both of you. Now, what I'm sure that both of you are thinking about is, well, I don't have time to do that because I'm here to practice law. If your name's on the door, or if you have a financial investment in that, you need to, because you are a business person, whether you want to admit it or not. So, right. Yeah.
I'm taking my name off the door now.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot.
Well, let me ask you this, and this is, this is applicable to my firm immediately right now. And, we're in the middle of COVID, and, there's a lot of remote work going on. We're just this week, we came back, essentially half of our staff this week, half of our staff next week, and we're alternating. Well, how do you onboard and how do you teach culture to a new employee in the middle of COVID and remote work?
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, this COVID thing has just knocked everybody for a loop. And I firmly believe that organizations and people nobody's going to go back to the way things were, because that's gone. We're going to have a new normal. And so you're either going to be better off or worse off than you were when you entered into this. And so with regards to a new person that comes on in your culture, if you've done things like been intentional, and Tad, I know we've done some of this work with your firm, and, put on a piece of paper, even, why does the firm exist? What are some of the key values that you want every person to hold as their kind of true north as they, do work on your behalf? Those are the types of conversations that need to be had, and that can be had probably on some levels, even on a deeper level in this Zoom world, because there aren't as many distractions coming in. So I think it's really just truly taking a step back every time you have to hire somebody. Okay, we think this is what we need. Is it really what we need right now? Because change, what's that expression? The only constant about change is that is change or whatever. I just butchered that, but I think you know what I mean. We're not getting back to a sense of stasis anytime soon. So
can you give us some tips as far as, so we talked about adding an employee, changing, employees in the middle of COVID, but, let's say you got your staff and, everybody's working remote. Can you give us some tips on, motivating employees that are working remotely and monitoring to make sure that things are actually getting done?
Yeah. And so, some of the motivation, well, first of all, motivation's an interesting thing. Nobody can motivate anybody else. It's an internal thing. But what we can do is create an environment in which people can be self-motivated. And so, unfortunately, the unemployment rate has gone from like 3% to 13% like that. So there's a little inherent motivation of, I got to keep my job, so I'm going to do whatever. But I think while you're trying to keep them motivated, I'm going to use the word engaged as well, as far as wanting to not just work for rational reasons, like, I need air conditioning and food's a good thing. There's that emotional connection to wanting to be able to work somewhere. I think that having constant touch points with your team, but understanding the why, because nobody wants to feel like Big Brother's watching them. But if you can have different touch points, insist on people using the video function on Zoom, because number one, it helps you figure out if they're okay, right? Because you've got all sorts of people working at your firm. Some have kids, some are single, some have, are dog parents or cat parents. They all have different things going on. Sometimes you just need to lay eyes on somebody to see how they're doing. And so the monitoring piece, I think it's one of those things that if you have been clear with your folks what's expected and that you get them used to the checking in piece, there's different ways you can monitor stuff. I think some of y'all's, I'm not an expert on all the different kind of softwares that, attorneys use in every office, but I know some of them, they can tell when you've logged in, how long you stayed logged in, all of that kind of stuff. But I would say that should be kind of the last resort as far as trying to catch somebody. It's more a matter of, trying to keep somebody engaged. But I've got several clients who've had that. Some people just aren't good in this world, right? They either don't like their job or they're easily distracted. So I'd say look at what technology fixes you have, whether it's your email server or, any of your case management server or whatever communication tools you use. I know a lot of people use Microsoft Teams or Slack, things like that. But I would spice it up, have touch point meetings, have fun events that aren't just work related. I know, Tad, you've done a couple of those things, which are kind of fun. People are starving for personal connection right now. And unfortunately, we're just not getting it on the levels that we truly want or need. So to the extent that you can continue some of that, I think is helpful.
Yeah, we did a couple of real fun things. I thought they were fun anyway. And we did for a week, we posted a random trivia question at different times during the day on Slack. And it wasn't something you could just look it up in Google. It was like firm history or, something strange. And, the employees had to respond, and whoever the first person to get the answer correct, they got, we sent them a bottle of wine to their house, or we sent something to them. We also did a baby picture game where we had everybody submit a baby picture. And then that Friday of that week, we sent everybody the baby pictures, numbered them, and you had to, pick out who was who. And, now productivity that day went down a little bit because we had so many people spending a lot of time trying to figure out who was who, but they were good ways, I thought, to really get the firm engaged. And since, we're not just at the water cooler bantering and talking about our weekend, that was a way to kind of get everybody together on a personal level and not worried about work.
Yeah. Well, and I think to just add one piece to that is, I talked about humility up front. There's also, as you're leading your firm, whoever you are on the other end of hearing this, it's understand where you are with this whole thing, because self-awareness is pretty powerful, and understand where you are. And then also assume best intentions, because I can't tell you how many people at the beginning of this, like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. I'm never going to be able to trust my staff. They're never going to be able to work from home. We're not going to get anything done. And now I know people who are like, oh gosh, I got 75% of my people that are never coming back to the office because I'm going to save all this money on rent and all this other kind of stuff. So when you talk about wanting to get to that kind of monitoring piece, if you've assumed best intentions, hey, sometimes it's easier to go to the grocery store at 2:00 in the afternoon because that's when the least number of people are there. So the one time that happens, okay. But then, check yourself as far as, what could be happening. And then when you notice the person that's not, showing up on the Slack calls, or that, hasn't been signed into TrialWorks or whatever, FileVine or whatever else they may have for 4 hours, then you go down that path. But
so I have a question for you on personality types, because I did the DISC assessment, and I came back as like a strong C or CS. It fit me perfectly. And so, my challenge is working on teams with people who have dominant personalities. And because I just know myself, sometimes I'm like, that doesn't make any sense, and I'm not going to accept it. Right. And it's like, I'm going to throw a temper tantrum. That's just not going to work. How can I communicate with someone who is either a subordinate or who is on, business partner level? And for those people out there who are just different personality types, I mean, is there some practical tips that you might have, no matter where you fall on the spectrum?
Yeah, for sure. And so, about 75% of the population is different from each of us. So that means people communicate differently, make decisions, all that kind of stuff. And when you get with somebody who is completely opposite from you, that can cause a little bit of friction. But if you handle it in the right way, it can reap great rewards. And so this is such an easy, obvious concept that people are shocked when I talk about this. But if you know that you are somebody that's very detail oriented and somebody else is a little bit more forceful, have a conversation with them and say, hey, I'm somebody who needs a little bit more detail. I know that you want to get to the end zone quicker, but it takes me a little bit longer to try and figure out all the plays. Can we talk about how we're going to handle communication as we start this project, as we work on this case, as we do things? Because again, it all starts with self-awareness and knowing that about yourself. It's not about you changing yourself, but let's say Tad's somebody who is all results and you're somebody that wants a little bit more of a process. If you don't communicate that piece to Tad, he's not going to know that. He's just going to keep pushing at results. And he's probably going to sit there and think, oh, well, Mike's just taking his own sweet time going down all these different paths. Same thing with a staff member. They need to understand why you're asking for all the detail and the step-by-step process, because that's just the way you're wired, and that's cool.
So in some sense too, if you take the approach of this is just the way that I am, that can also be disarming in a conversation as well, right?
Yeah, it's use your powers for good, not evil, is what I kind of joke around with.
Right.
Yeah, use it as a conversational tool to help build trust and break down barriers, not as either a sword or a shield. That's just the way I am. You got to get over it, because the worst trait that I see in any kind of a leader is that person of, well, I'm the boss and I have that right. Okay, at the end of the day, when your name is on the paycheck, that is in fact true. But nobody wants to hear that. I didn't like being told to clean my room or eat my vegetables because I said so from my parents. I certainly don't want to hear it, now. So it's really about trying to engage with a person on a level to figure out how the two of you can work most effectively together. So.
Do you also do couples counseling?
No.
I'm asking for a friend.
Yeah, asking for a friend. No, definitely not me.
His name rhymes with dad.
Right. Yeah, sure. Hearing you talk about empathy and communication, and dealing with trial lawyers and being married to a trial lawyer, it's, sometimes the home life isn't much different than the work life. In the relationship paradigm, it can be very similar.
Mm-hmm, for sure, especially in the middle of a pandemic when your spouse moves home full time to work at home. So, but you're right. And, even I'm certainly not trying to say that anybody's staff is like children, but sometimes it does feel like, oh my gosh, these issues, I should have just gone to be a teacher. I'd at least get summers and, Christmas off. Instead of dealing with all this stuff. But it's just think about how you'd handle things with your kids. You've got all sorts of teachable moments. Every single person in your office has an emotional bank account, much like the one at Wells Fargo or Bank of America or wherever. Every interaction you have with another individual, you're either making a deposit or a withdrawal in that person's emotional bank account relative to their relationship with you.
Perfect.
And it's our job as managers or bosses or leaders or our names on the door to make sure that, that bank account stays full, because in the end, that's what drives the success of the firm.
Yeah.
And having people perform.
Yeah. And just one last point on that from marketing, the amount of money that I've seen some firms spend on marketing is mind-boggling. Especially when you compare it to how little they invest in the relationships with people, because I don't care how cool the billboard is, how much digital marketing, SEO, all that stuff you do. On a lot of levels, the best marketing tool you have are the people that work with you and for you. Because if they're not happy, they're the ones that are interacting with the clients, the potential clients, the current clients, and the former clients. They're the people that are really representing your brand at the highest level for you.
And Cheryl, I know you teach a lot of CLE because, you go to, being married to a trial lawyer. I've seen you speak quite a bit. I've invited you to speak quite a bit. I'm hoping we're going to get the podcast dropped before AAJ Amped Up. And I understand you're speaking at Amped Up. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm doing, I think it's the small firm section this time. I'm doing two different pieces. One on why is it important to have a business plan and vision for your firm. And then the other one is, a lot about what we've talked about here. How do I manage and motivate my team? Just some of the things that you need to think about as you're trying to run a business. Oh, and by the way, go to court or practice law or file whatever y'all need to file, or depositions, etc. So.
And that'll be interesting. And I assume you're going to talk about strategic plans as well as business plans and that. And, as other lawyers come to work with me that, have been with other firms, very, very few firms out there have a business plan or a strategic plan, and it's valuable.
Yeah. Well, everybody says I want to make more money. And then I always kind of jokingly say, okay, so if you make $10 more next year, it's a win, right? And they're like, oh, no, that's not what I mean. Mm-hmm. But if you don't, if you don't write it down and if you don't have some goals to get there, it really just is a wish. So.
Yeah. And Cheryl, if somebody wants to, that's listening to the podcast wants to reach out to you and talk about business coaching or strategic planning, how do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, you can go to my website, www.carltonhumancapital.com. It's also Cheryl.Pope at carltonhumancapital.com. So.
Sounds great. And we'll put that in our show notes also, Cheryl. So anybody coming to download the show will be able to, just click on the link to get you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity, and it's good to have some human interaction, albeit through a computer screen. I've enjoyed our time together.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Always. Thanks, Cheryl.
Take care.
That was great.
Yeah, she's so good. And, a lot of law firms don't, work with somebody like that. And, having worked with her for 5 or 6 years now, I don't see why more don't, because it's important to do the things that she's talking about, because it helps you as the owner, and it helps, you generate revenue, and it helps make sure that your clients are taken care of. So, I try to go to all of her CLEs that she does.
We talk about trying to get things in line, whether that's personally or for our business. And it always reminds me of a quote that the best way to predict the future is to create it. And the idea that you have to kind of get things, geared towards some central objective, whether that's in your personal life. And your personal life will also bleed over to your business, or maybe be amplified by your business. And then also get all those oars going in the same direction. Because if one's not, then you just don't know what's going to happen. And if you can sort of set a bullseye or a target for yourself or for your business, then at least this is what I'm working towards.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the most valuable thing that I've learned from Cheryl is, when she's talking about, doing a business plan, doing a strategic plan, is really putting down in writing what you want your firm to be like, and don't just put it in a drawer and never look at it again. You need to be looking at it, every time you hire. And like she said, making sure that you're hiring someone who will be part of the office culture, and the office culture is one that strives to achieve all of the things you've put down in writing. And the firms that actually do strategic planning, and corporations are the same way. It goes in a drawer, nobody ever pays attention to it again, and you got to make it a living document.
Right. And I think what happens is that sometimes, I know I'm guilty of this too, is I'll focus on some successful person who just sort of did it on a whim. And those are the outliers, right? I mean, a large majority of the people who are successful, whether they're in this industry or any other industry, have a strategic plan in place, are following it, and then have someone like Cheryl helping them along the way, objectively, sort of grading them on a curve. Yeah.
I was reading an article the other day. He was talking about, 9 of the 10 wealthiest Americans are all entrepreneurs. They didn't, it's not investments. They didn't inherit their wealth. They started their own business. And so many trial lawyers and, law firms are really entrepreneurs. And right. So, what I've always strived to do is take that entrepreneurial spirit and the business sense that you have to be successful, and incorporate that with a law firm. And there's no reason they don't marry well. They should.
Yeah. And we had an interview from Blake Marcus, who went from an old established firm, started a new practice with some partners that also left that firm, came back because he was given an opportunity to guide this with some of the younger lawyers there in a different direction. And so, it's not that you have to go establish your own practice in order to put some of these things in place, some of these ideas in place. You can employ them, working with the existing staff that you have, working with your bosses if you're listening to this and are employed, figuring out some ways to communicate with people. And I love the idea of just going to someone and saying, this is how I communicate, and this is why it's easy for me to communicate this way. That is just one thing I think anyone can do, no matter the situation.
And, Cheryl's going to be talking at AAJ Amped Up. We've talked about it a lot on the podcast over the last couple of episodes. In the first episode where we interviewed Colleen, as far as what Amped Up was. So, I encourage everybody that listens to the podcast to get signed up for Amped Up, which starts on July 13th. And we'll put that in the show notes as well. And go see Cheryl and listen to some of the other things that she has to talk about at the small firm section. And
I heard there might be an online bourbon tasting. Have I heard this correctly?
That is correct. Gavel Video, which we're a part of, is hosting an online bourbon tasting at 6:30 Eastern time on Monday. I'm real excited about it. We've got, I've invited the head whiskey person from Brown-Forman for Indiana is coming to a bar that I own over in New Albany, Indiana. We're going to be doing a live bourbon tasting from the bar, and she's going to be talking about 4 different Old Forester bourbons, which is the Distillery Rose series. And Brian Hara, who joined us for our second podcast, is also coming to the bar. And we're going to do another interview with him as part of the bourbon tasting and talk about his book as well. So it's the first virtual bourbon tasting that AAJ's ever had.
Virtual bourbon tasting. We're just,
Yes.
I mean, it's a 21st century. We're going to have robot cops here before too long and flying spaceships, and everything from the Jetsons is going to come true.
Yes.
It all begins with the virtual bourbon tasting.
It might end with a virtual bourbon tasting.
Actually, let me think about this. It might actually all end civilization as we know it. Hey, real quick, I think we have some housekeeping things. I think we're supposed to tell people to subscribe to the podcast. I always just assume that they're listening to it. They're probably subscribed. Leave a review if you're so inclined. And then also, we are, because we've received some feedback, putting out a lot of content on the site. Some people are saying, hey, we'd love to continue reading these interviews, but when they come out on Friday, it's a little difficult for us to do. So we are paring back. We are going Monday, Wednesday with the interviews. We still want you to nominate yourself for one. For the website, nominate. We'll send you some questions.
And a lot of new content. Saul Gruber's got his podcast getting ready to start. You're getting ready to start a podcast on talking about jury verdicts as well. So lots of new stuff coming down the pipe.
That is probably where civilization will end. If I can figure out how to get the internet to work and my computer turned on, I'm halfway there. Yeah.
Well, we've been impressed so far. You've made it 5 episodes now without the hamsters, refusing to turn the wheel down there.
We have a talk. It's a motivational pep talk. Give them a little headband, and I say, "Go, buddy, go."
Communication, like Cheryl said. You gotta communicate.
Communication, brother.
Mike, good seeing you, and we'll see you next time.
Sounds good, brother.
That wraps another episode of the official Lawyer Minds podcast. Please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. Explore the other content Lawyer Minds has to offer and engage with us on social media. Your feedback on the show and ideas for future shows is always welcomed. See you next time.